I'm going to start, Ant said at the start, it'd be good if the speaker's funny. So I'm going to take up that challenge just off the cuff, and you're already laughing, that's good, that's a good start. I'm going to start with a funny real-life story. You can be the judge. If it's a funny real-life story, you can tell me. My first family holiday to France, I was doing GCSE French, which in my family made me the resident expert and nominated speaker. This was a really big mistake. I got an E, and I loved a wind-up, and I still really do love a wind-up. Our first interaction on our trip to France was with a ticket officer on the autoroute. Maybe you've had that similar experience. My mum was sat in the passenger side, and so she had to do the engaging with the ticket officer, and she panicked, and she looked back to her son, who she loved, and she says, "What do I say? What do I say?" And with my GCSE E and my enjoyment of a wind-up, I said, "Mum," whispered in her ear, "Avez-vous au fromage?" Mum, is what I said to her. Now, if you know any French at all, you'll know that this is not the kind of language you'd really want to use on the autoroute. For those who don't know, it means, "Do you have any cheese?" And the gentleman that she was speaking to was very cross. He just kept firing questions back at her, but my mum trusted me. And she looked back at me, and she looked back at him, and she just kept going. "Avez-vous au fromage? Do you have any cheese?" There was beeping horns, there was anger, there was immediate holiday tension. The point of the story is, and I bet you're glad that there's a point to this story, it doesn't matter in life what the answer is if you're asking the wrong question. It doesn't matter in life what on earth the answer is if you're asking a stupid question. Psalm 8 has I don't know if we could have the text up, that would be grand if we can. It's got a chiastic structure, which is maybe a complex word, an unfamiliar word, but it basically means that the meaning is in the middle of this psalm. So when you spot that in a psalm, sometimes you can see that the way that they're structured, and in the middle of this psalm is a critical question for life. A question that should you should return to every day, that should form part of your thinking for life. You should maybe even shape your life around it. And the middle of the psalm is verse 4. What is man that you are mindful of him? What is it like to be a human being that you, O God, in the heavens, should be mindful of him? Ricky Gervais is a Marmite character. I don't know if you're familiar with Ricky Gervais. I imagine most of you will be familiar with him, partly because he says what people daren't say, but often think, but partly because he questions a lot. And he gets us to ask a lot of questions. He's identified as an atheist, which he doesn't like. He doesn't like that term, not because he doesn't believe in God, but because of what the term assumes. The A part of the atheist, the phrase that we've got in our English vocabulary, assumes something. God needs to be disproven as opposed to he is just proven. God belief is the status quo, and Ricky Gervais would have that flipped round. He doesn't think he should need to explain his unbelief. God belief should be the alternative thing with all the explaining to do. The standard thing is not to believe. So he has a different question to the question at the start of Psalm chapter 8. He says, what is God that man is mindful of him? It's a question, actually, as often it is with Ricky Gervais, that a lot of people are asking out there. There is a lot of vitriol even about that question. Even for a thing as passive as Christianity, it gets people's goat up. That's maybe the expression that we'd use. It agitates people. It exercises people's thought processes. It's worth just thinking about the God question, why it still energizes us, why that is still a question. There's a couple of musings that I've got, a couple of possibilities. One, it's a good question. It's a good question to ask. It's the thinking person's question. Ricky Gervais often asks the thinking person's question. What I like about atheists is that they're wrestling with something. They're not passive about it. They're at least trying to figure it out, and this is a good question. But also, another reason is that it's a needed correction. People are agitated by this subject matter because they want to push back on the legacy of Christendom over the years. This scienceless legacy that sometimes caused abuses and confusion. But possibly, and this is what I'd want to present to you, and I think this is what David sees, is because the question of God And I think this is what the start of our text says. It demands to be asked. It demands to be asked. We can't not ask it. Even in these enlightened times, people look up like David and they see that the heavens, what? The heavens declare his glory. We look up and we are caused to wonder. And the skies speak. We see something magnificent, something incredible, something huge. So read with me. Lord our God, how majestic is your name in the earth. You've set your glory in the heavens. Through the praise of your children and infants, you have established a stronghold against your enemies to silence the foe and the avenger. We'll come back to that verse. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him? Just for a second, let's just try and stay in David's mind as he's thinking about creation, and maybe even think about your own thoughts as you've looked up over the years. He's amazed at the vastness and the splendor of the heavens that he sees above him. And he's not had the benefit that many of us has of that kid's lesson that we get in school, where the solar system that we see is just a grain of sand in the vast cosmos of space. He looks up and he says, God must be incredible. God must be magnificent. God must to do that. And then the psalmist gives us this incredible little detail, this wonderful, gorgeous little detail. Sometimes when you're a preacher, you're really helped by these little words that make sense of the passage. God did this with his fingers. The universe is not just vast. God's not just enormous that he's able to do this. God is majestic. That's what the passage says to us. It's incredible what God does. It's not just big, and just think about how you see the universe as well. It's beautiful. It's balanced. Think about how we exist. Think about how we all just manage to keep on breathing. It's got purpose behind it. It's finely tuned, and it's intricate. And David says God does all of this with his fingers. I don't think he's trying to get us to imagine that literally God did it with his fingers. He's trying to imagine that this is the work of a fine craftsman. David sees the beauty and the balance and the intricacies and the purpose, and he sees the dexterity of a craftsman. He sees the fine strokes of an artist. We often say, don't we, that behind the artwork, if you know anything about art, when you look at a picture, you don't just see the drawing. Often, if you look at the painting long enough, you see the artist. David is saying to us in this moment through this psalm, as we look out at creation, we don't just see that it's big and God's powerful, but we actually see the brush strokes of his work. Through history, forever, I would say, people have looked up and asked the God question. And today, though we reason God dead, and we declare him dead, and we would try and prove him dead, the problem we've got is that his fingerprints, his handiwork, his fine brushstrokes are all over the place. First thing that we see, I think, in this psalm is that the God question, whether Ricky Gervais is asking it or whether I'm asking it, the God question that for centuries we've sort of pushed down, especially over the last couple of 100 years, we've sort of pushed down. It's incredible, really, the strength and the energy we've put into pushing it down. It's not going to go away. This psalm tells us as long as the human beings look up, they are going to wonder about the question of God. So I would say to you, I would declare to you, no matter what we figure out, no matter what we learn in the next couple of 100 years, we're still going to have the God question. And no matter what your life's journey looks like over the next couple of years, if you're just musing about God, if you're thinking about God, just consider your last breath. From this point till that, at some point, because when we look up, what did we sing in that song? Even the stones cry out. God speaks to us through his creation. I would say to you that question is never going to go away. And we are left, I think, in this context, wrestling with the middle of that psalm. It's a reasonable question to ask. What is man? Is it possible that God, the God who did all of that, all of this, can really care for us? Can we believe that he's there? Can we believe that he exists in the stratosphere? But more than that, can we believe that that God, the God that created this, if we've gotten that far down the journey, can we believe that he actually cares for us? What is man? What am I? What are you walking around in Castle or Pontia, wherever you're from, that God should look in on you? And David in this psalm, I think, and I really appreciate this about the Bible sometimes, I think it's okay for us to say, just believe it sometimes. God cares for you. Let me just tell you that God cares for you, and just that should be enough. But this psalm doesn't do that to us. The Bible doesn't leave us there. It doesn't just tell us how it is. It cares to explain itself to us. So there's two in this psalm. There are two, what I would maybe say are grown-up intellectual reasons for faith, for believing that God cares for us. So the first one that we see in this psalm, and it's through verses 5 and 8, is because of how we're put together. We can believe that God cares for us by looking around, believe it or not, at the human race, by looking at what kind of people we actually have. So read through, keep losing the text, verse 5 and 8 with me. Look what he does there. You made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You've made them rulers over the works of your hands. You've put everything under their feet. Think about what he's referencing. What is he getting at here? All the flocks and herds and the animals of the wild, the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea, all that swim in the paths of the sea. O Lord our God, how majestic is your name in all the earth. He goes back to the creation account. He talks about what we're made of, how we're made to reflect God, how we're made to have honor and look after the place. One of the things that our thinkers, our philosophers, our academics are wrestling with now is what human beings look like. So since the Enlightenment, you might say, what it actually means for us to be human if we take God out of the picture. If we delete or we cancel the creation story, which is maybe what's happening. A lot of the thinking that we're doing now, all the intellectuals that actually, so often in life, most of us just carry on and don't delve so deeply into it, but there are people that are really wrestling with this subject matter. And some of the conclusions that these people are coming to, one of the terms that we put over it is nihilism. Hopefully I'm saying that right. It's a huge black hole. Some of the really deep thinkers say, I don't think we should think about this too much. It's troubling. If there's no God, if there's no purpose, if it's all just an accident. So read what a guy called Bertrand Russell said. And this is a quote I've nicked off of a sermon by Tim Keller. I'm just putting my hands up. But it's like, I looked for better quotes and I looked for better arguments, but it's here. This is the argument. Mankind, his origin, it's a bit of a long quote, but it covers all the bones of it. Mankind, his origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and his beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms, that no fire, stay with it, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave. That all the labor of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast, this is depressing, in the vast death of the solar system. And the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe of ruins. Would you want to have a coffee with this guy? Would you want to hang around with this guy? He's thinking about it, and this is the conclusions that he's getting to. Without God, if there's no God, it's maybe a place that we don't often go. And then he concludes, only, thinking like this, only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the foundation of unyielding despair can the soul's habitation be safely built. Only if we start off from thinking of the universe like that, can we have any platform to think about anything. That's where we've got to start. We've got to build from there. And what he says is, if we build from there, then we're in real trouble. And just think about that, if it's just a big accident at the start, if it's all just a big accident, if it's just a big coincidence, just chemicals coming together, and just think about this for a second, if we think about where the universe is going, if we believe this, if absolutely nothing lasts, nothing endures of what we've done at all, all of our dreams, all of our hopes, this is what Bertrand Russell's saying, everything that we could ever achieve, everything that we could ever fathom, all the moral points that we've come to along, if that goes, nothing lasts. nothing will last. And it will be like, consider this for a second, this is what he's saying, it never happened. The only place to start is with the thought that nothing matters. And as we think this out, the idea that we come to is that it's nihilism. And when you think about what that might be, and just stay with it, I know it's getting a tiny bit depressing, even our sense, if nothing matters, if it's all just a total coincidence, even our sense of right and wrong is just arbitrary. Even intrinsic values of worth and justice are just things that we've made up. It's one person's word against another. It's all relative. Have you heard that expression? This is the world that we live in now. This is kind of the zeitgeist of how we think. Everything's relative. What does that mean? There's no consequences, nothing like that. And sometimes I think we can look at the world and we see it played out. We see it played out sometimes in obvious ways when we forget all consequences, when we think everything might just be an accident and nothing matters in the end. Sometimes we see that play out in wars. And we look at it and we go, yeah, we can see that if you think that it's just an accident at the start and if you think nothing happens at the end, lives don't matter. Do you see that in war? Sometimes we get to that place where we're thinking, and lives don't matter. We've had recently riots where we lose all sense of any meaning or anything like that, and you can see people in the streets with no sense of meaning, and we lose all sense of honor. Honor doesn't matter. And it probably less obviously, but sometimes we get to the point where we can't even see it. Maybe if you would dare to say this, our society might be in this sort of area now where we can't even really see what's right and wrong anymore. With God dead, morality floats. That's what's happened over the last few hundred years. It's a floating concept. Who's to say what's right? Who's to say what's wrong? And when morality floats, and I think this is the thing that we're seeing bear out over the last couple of hundred years, it can come down anywhere or it can come down nowhere. Who's to say what's right and wrong? And here's the thing I would say about the human race. As we think about this, as we think about the vast nothingness, as we think about us all just being here by chance and nothing really mattering, the truth of it is, human beings, not just Christians, human beings do not believe that. We don't believe that. We don't think like that. Maybe you could say we daren't think like that, but I would say we don't think like that. We believe that all life matters. We believe that all life has meaning. We care about the planet, even though we're messing it up. We care about it. We care about social justice to the extent that all of these things we will fight for because we believe them. And we could say perhaps religion has made a horrible mess and it's put some odd moral lines down, but we know that still, even though religion has made a bit of a mess in areas, we still know that some things are right and some things are wrong. We don't believe in nothing. We don't believe in nothing. Christians, non-Christians, we don't believe in nothing. We believe in something. And it's what gives our planet and our life hope. And I would suggest it's what David sees in this part of the text here, verses 5 through to 7. When he looks out at the humans, I think that's what's happening. He doesn't see nothingness and emptiness. Actually, what he sees is what humans are really made of, and it's brilliant. And it's a high calling, and it's a calling to hold on to. He sees creation. He says what we're made of, what we're made for, verses 5 through 7. You've made them a little, this is human beings, I think. You have made them a little lower than the angels. That's where we're at. And crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds and the animals of the wild, the birds in the sky and the fish of the sea. Do you see what human beings are like? Do you relate to that? I relate to that. That's how I see it. We were made like that. We weren't made for nothingness. We weren't made by chance. We weren't made with no purposes in mind. It's intrinsic to us. God made us to have honor. God made us with purpose. We don't just give up on the planet. We don't just ignore it. We're like, we need to fix this. We fight back. We go, this isn't right. When we see violence, when we see injustice, when we see things that would point to nothingness, we say, no, we're not having that. We're not standing for that. We're going to fight back. It's a high calling. David sees in this moment, I think, that people bear the image of God. That's why we fight back. We reflect something of who God is. And like a child, when they're grown up, looks back at their life. I've just experienced that today. My eldest is 18. Like a child grows up and looks back and realizes that rules and responsibility and values that they've been taught and shaped into don't just mean punishment, don't mean nothingness, actually mean care. David realizes from the way human beings are put together and made that God just doesn't leave them to nothingness. The fact that we are like we are, that we don't give up on this place, that we hold things dear, that things matter, is proof that God cares. He cares. What I'd say now is, sometimes we see it. You might be conscious now thinking, yeah, sometimes I'm aware of that. Often I would reckon that we don't see it at all. One of the things that the Bible says really brilliantly, one of the things that Jesus says is, if we've seen Jesus, Jesus declares this, if you've seen me, then you've seen the Father. You've seen God. Jesus is God incarnate, God in flesh. And when we see him come with miracles, when we see him come with power, when we see his resurrection, we know that we have. But then when we also look at Jesus and we see him give worth to the poor in spirit, we see him honor the beggar, when we see him stop from all the hurry and honor the person with nothing, when he holds right and wrong together, just watch the way that Jesus speaks and how he teaches. When he holds right and wrong together, but he holds it together with love. When he leads, but at the same time as he's leading and governing, he washes people's feet. And we see how this changes the whole world. We see a reflection of God, and we see how we need to be, and we see how our world needs to be. We can see that God cares because of how he puts us together. And finally, the last thing I think that we see in the psalm, we know that he cares not just because of the way that he makes us up, but because of the way he looks out for us. Because of the way that he visits us. I think that's a part of the story behind the text. Because of the way he comes after us. Because of the way he doesn't give up on us. How do you know in your life who loves you? How do you know? How do you know who your nearest and dearest are? How do you know when the people really care for you? When you're sick or when you feel like you don't matter, how do you know? It's those that come round. It's those that send you a message. It's those that call for you. One of the words that you'll see in the text is that how can we believe that God is mindful of us? Somebody that cares about you, that loves you. The idea behind the word mindful there is this idea of visitation, actually. The origin of the word is an idea of visitation. There's so much on your mind that you've got to go and do something about it. You know that you're loved when somebody comes round to do that. David's thinking it out. See there in verse 4. What are humans? And he's looking into the future, as it were. What are humans that God would come and do that? And this is before Jesus comes. Here's our hope. God doesn't just leave us in nothingness. He doesn't leave us wondering about nothingness. He doesn't leave us when we are alone, when we are sad, and we are down. We see his hand in that he comes to visit us. This is the hope of the gospel. He's not on some distant cloud looking on, laughing at how wrong it's going. He comes to where we are. But he doesn't just visit us. Don't know if you know this, but not all visitors are good visitors. Do you get rubbish visitors in your life? Do you get people that come round that you wish hadn't come round? Do you get them? He visits well when he comes. Sometimes visitors come around and they linger longer than they should. Sometimes visitors come around and they demand from you. Sometimes they come round and they just gas and you can't shut them up. But some visitors come round to show you that they care, and you know that they care because they know what you need. People that love you, people that care for you, they're not just the people that come round, they're the people that come round and know what you need. You just need a hug. You just need to pop in for 2 minutes. You don't need to go to the toilet. You don't need to see through the rest of the house. Just pop in and out. People that love you, people that care, know what you need. How does God visit when he comes to us? He could come to us in any which way. If he's an all-powerful God, he could come to us in any which way he like and make any kind of demands on us that he would want. How does he visit? How does he visit us well. I think David touches on it there in verse 2. And at first, I must admit, as I looked this, it was one of those verses I'm like, right, where do I go with this? First of all, it was like that, right, I don't really know what to make of this. Through the praise of children and infants, you've established a stronghold against your enemies to silence the foe and the avenger. It looks a bit weird. It's like a ninja singing Baby Army. How is God going to win over the world? What exactly is he saying there? Here's what I think he's saying. What do we need? God's strength will be shown in what? God's strength will be declared in weakness. God is going to visit us humbly. He's going to come as a baby. Why? Because that's what we need. He comes as a baby. He comes as a homeless man. He comes as a crucified man. Because we need to find him in our hearts. We don't need him to beat us with a stick. We need to find him in our hearts. And in order to find him in our hearts, we need to see his love. So he comes as a vulnerable child, sacrificing everything so we can see the heart of God and know what we need. What question are you asking? What's your question? A couple of questions for you on the way home in the car before you get to bed tonight. Look up at the stars. Look out at humanity. Look up at the creation. Look out at all of the people. Look at the cross. Take a second to look at the story of the cross and ask, who am I? Who am I in this cosmos? And let God answer you and say that you are a child of God.